So we talk about classic movies like movies up until about 1985, and even including the other great industries, Japan, Italy, France. India and China, I don't know so much about. It's not just that they were well made, well, the existence of an industry fomented great craft, starting with the screenplay and but because of that, and maybe the newness of the medium and what was happening in world culture in the 20th century that someone more educated than I would have to explain. But those 80 years, it's not just great movies, but like the bird's eye view is that collectively it was a extraordinarily remarkable presentation of humanity to humanity.
Cinema, meaning. Yes.
Cinema, like what it came out of us to us. I mean, if art is a mirror and cinema is the most verisimil mirror, the most accurate mirror, because you can see people, who are dead. It's it's an extraordinary medium, as you and I agree. But that first 80 years, it's like it was all about humanity and all about people and a consistent and vigorous representation of, I hate to use this hackneyed term, the human condition. You could relate to things. I mean, in TCM last week, you may know I introduced Ben-Hur.
And now to see Ben-Hur on a Saturday morning at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood, restored from an 8K scan of the original negative.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you why Ben-Hur, actually.
Well, they asked me to.
Okay.
Well, because I now have an ongoing relationship with TCM I'm their favorite host who isn't on camera. But I put my all into my introductions. I really do a deep dive. So I do them pretty selectively because I spend a lot of time doing it. Last year I did The Searchers and an introduction to Janine Basinger when she got the Robert Osborne Award.
Yeah.
Put a lot of time into those. And I wound up doing my Searchers talk like 5 other places.
Really?
I did it for TCM, and then I was in Bologna, and they had me do it in Bologna.
Is it recorded? Can I find it on YouTube or something? I didn't see
Probably.
it. I love that movie, and I'd love to hear you talk about that movie.
Yeah, and there's a great book about it. If you love that movie, there's a really good book about
Which one?
Written by a guy there's only one, by a guy named Glenn Frankel.
Okay.
Specifically about the history of the story and then the making of The Searchers. But anyway, that's what I wanted to say about classic films. I'm like, oh gosh, I love Betty Grable, or I love Clark Gable. I mean, that's all. I love Frank Capra. That's all important. But the bird's eye view of why we call them classic films is this presentation. But what I was going to say about Ben-Hur, I mean, the whole reason they hired William Wyler to do it, not Cecil B. DeMille, was to get the humanity.
Yeah.
To get the humanity and the intimate story. The producer, Sam Zimbalist, told Wyler, look, the spectacle is going to take care of itself. What we want is the good, intimate stuff. But you see Ben-Hur, which was awesome when it came out, and still fucking awesome because of how you relate to it.
Yeah.
And even topical, like with the Roman occupation of Judea at the beginning and the Jews struggling for freedom, speaks a lot now about what's going on now. I mean, all sides. You could see it as the Israelis oppressing the Palestinians, or the Israelis feeling oppressed by this or that. So they're timeless. I don't want to say it's still current. These are eternal issues.
Yeah. Which
have preceded our birth and will follow our death, that are represented in these movies. You don't see much crap like that anymore,
No, you touched on so many things. If I had infinite time with you, first of all, like being a TCM host is like my dream thing, like everything associated with it. And the way you kind of lovingly talk about that period of cinema, I've often heard people talk about in a weird way. It's 85 is what you said. I think there's a demarcation around 77. I've always thought there's this joint between network and Star Wars where there's like a 1 year shift that an entire landscape changed. Like we went from a network culture to a Star Wars.
But 79, you have Apocalypse Now and Manhattan.
Yeah. And you still get Raging Bull, but there's
I'm pushing it a little bit. I want it to include Amadeus
Okay, that's where you're like,
in,
I don't want to cut it off until after
85.
that.
I'm nudging it up.
But yeah, there was a transition period, certainly.
Yeah.
Um, when I think about your movies, and you talk about Ben-Hur in a way that like, because I kind of want to hear you talk a little bit about Tracy Flick Can't Win in some way, but because when you talk about Ben-Hur and its relevance, I immediately think about Election as a movie that I think mirrors relevance to this day in terms of our process of democracy. And it's so under fire, obviously, right now. And like, every major election I come back to, and I'm like, when I saw Election way back when, I remember there was like this canary in the coal mine to me about like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's about kids, but I think it's about something else too.
Yeah, even our Citizen Ruth, which not
Yes.
many people saw, sadly remains current because of all the abortion shenanigans.
If you were to return, if Tracy Flick Can't Win, which you've talked about a little bit, do you feel like there's an updated approach or a new chapter in some of the dialogue around that topic? And that character is so it feels so important to me right now. Like in the decades since.
So a couple things. Number one, our when I say our, I mean Jim Taylor, my co-writer, and I and me. Uh, we hadn't thought about a sequel until Tom Perrotta wrote this fine book, Tracy Flick Can't Win.
Right.
Now, and it whetted everybody's appetite. Reese Witherspoon's, mine, Jim Taylor's, the producers, the studio who owns the rights. The only trouble was that I just can't go back to a high school.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you've read Tracy Flick Can't Win, but it takes place again in a high school. And between the election and the holdovers and even Sideways and a pilot I did called Hung, all were high. I just can't do it. So Jim and I have reconceived it differently. And then, and we're working on it actively. We'll start work on it in 20 minutes today.
That's
10,
great.
30. I'm squeezing you in before
I don't want to hold you from that.
before my writing day. But I got to say too that my interest in making it then and interest in revisiting that world now is not at all based on wishing to comment on or satirize politics. I approached the original. You have to approach it. That was a comedy, a human comedy, but set in the arena, in a political arena.
It's so funny too. Yeah.
So ipso facto, it becomes,
Yeah.
about politics because it's
Right.
set in that. But maybe what my interest is, where my interest lies, and maybe what gives legs to a political film is that the filmmakers aren't really interested in the politics. They're interested in the people, in the human comedy. But here's where it does become a political satire or commentary, and not just about contemporary politics, but again, eternal politics, which is people act out their individual psychodramas in the public arena. And you certainly see it now with this hyper, psychiatrically damaged, narcissistic, I don't know which path it would be, psycho or socio, whatever it is,
Right.
but you see that being played out in a
Oh,
public,
yes.
but everybody else too, to some degree or another. Biden's ego,
Yes.
nice guy, but his ego got played out.
Absolutely.
So then you sort of choose interesting characters, and then so Tracy Flick is kind of an eternal symbol of, I want to say blind ambition, but blind meaning unaware. She just has this urge about something in her psychiatric nature,
Yeah.
psychological nature that makes her be like that.
Yeah.
And she's funny, and we make comedy. So sorry for the long-winded
No,
answer.
it's a great answer. And you brought it back to your earlier point, which is what makes Ben-Hur and William Wyler. It's not that stuff that is maybe eternal. It's the humanity that's on display.
Well, that is eternal. Yes, and eternal themes.
Yeah, and I want to, because you've talked about making Westerns. We've talked about The Searchers. You've mentioned before that Ride the High Country. I think you listed it as like a really important movie, which immediately
It is.
caught
I
my
think it
eye.
is. I just saw the Wild Bunch projected. I had a private screening of the Wild Bunch a
Oh,
few nights ago to see how that, and that's another,
it's great.
towering achievement, but Ride the High Country makes you cry.
It I didn't know about TCM. That's a gift of TCM. Like it was there and I was like, I'll watch this. And I was like, holy moly, like this thing moves me and is powerful. And it's not on a lot of the lists. So
I
when I
think
saw it
it's,
on your list, I wanted
yeah,
to ask
I
you.
think it's so hard to say best movie. It's kind of a stupid thing to say, but for my money, it's his, and I love that director, most of it anyway, but that's his best movie. Because he could kind of go back and forth between muscular and misogynist and elegiac and, kind of like an alcoholic. Like an alcoholic will rage at you, but then, but I love you. I love you. He kind of has that duality in his in his films. I love Junior Bonner too. I like rodeo movies.
Yeah,
Um, I love The Lusty Men. Nick Caray's The Lusty Men.
oh
That's
yeah, no,
a
that's a
great
good one too.
rodeo movie. Yeah.
I think when you talked about too, when we talk like I think about Nebraska as being a really beautiful movie in some ways in that vein, but there's a relationship to the Western because of the relationship to landscape and how beautifully photographed it is. I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that genre, your interest in it, American landscape. It just feels like there's something there that you've explored and that maybe you're thinking about exploring again or trying to, and I'd love to hear you talk about it.
Yeah. So why does one love? So when I say I love Westerns, me personally, I don't love all of them. In
Yeah,
fact, maybe I even love a limited number of them. But the ones I love are really, well, first of all, it's nice to, I've been doing these urban comedies, say,
yeah.
with very, very specific types. But it's also nice. Cinema also exists interestingly and movingly in the land of archetypes. When you have archetypes, very made real, made flesh and blood characters, but there's also something archetypal about them. You see it in samurai movies and in westerns, and so, uh, and also I'm a history buff, and so these are films set in the past, the American past, and obviously too, anytime you make a period film or a futuristic film, a science fiction film, you're making a film intensely about today.
Yes.
And
I
and you
love that you
can't,
point that out. People
no,
don't
and
think about that, but it's more about today than anything about today is, right?
it is, and I think that's been a failure of Westerns in the last 30, like I don't think we've had a great Western since Unforgiven.
No.
We've had some good ones, but not, that's the last great one. And a lot of times it's just like a story that just sits there and has no resonance or meaning, and I don't get much out of it. And um, but I don't know, there's just something in that. The other thing too, even though I make highly verbal comedies or whatever, I'm much more interested in directing figures in space and action in a way. So if you ever watch my movies again and forget the dialogue, but just watch blocking, and I mean, I always wanted to approach my features the way Chuck Jones and um, I.B. Freeling and those guys used to do. Their criterion for the 6 minute Warner Brothers cartoon short was, can you turn down the sound and
Yes.
music
Yes.
but still tell what's going on? That's what I hope, in the best way,
Yeah.
not in a way where you're looking silently at the person next to you on the airplane and you can tell what's going on, like some John Wick movie or something.
Right.
But I mean, in a responsibly cinematic way, you can still follow the action. So I like.
Sideways has some real Wile E. Coyote vibes in a way, like it really does. Like,
Thanks. So anyway, I don't know. Those are some considerations around wanting to make a Western, but when you can get to that, a muscular cry,
hmm.
a muscular emotion, betrayal between men,
Hmm.
fathers and children, fathers and sons, fathers and daughters, but like really archetypal stuff that existed in Greek tragedy and Shakespeare, and then that's the right arena for those themes in cinema. is Westerns and samurai movies.
Yeah.
Basically, I think where you can play those things out. Or in the case of Ben-Hur, a Sword and Sandals movie.
Yeah, there's space for it there for sure. I think when you talk about that and you couple it with the ideas you mentioned about how it's about today, I think we're desperately in need. Like, I think we're begging for it, like for an incisive Western about
Right.
today.
And then when we say about today, and then I have to end on this note, George, even though it's delightful speaking to you.
Yeah.
When we say it's still timely, it's about today, what that means for me at its best is it's about every day. It's an eternal theme. And the more you can touch on eternal themes in your work, then the more you are making something about today. Plus, you don't even have to think about it very much, because as you're writing something, or in my case, also directing something, the winds of culture are blowing through you in ways you don't even understand, or maybe should you, but you'll see them on screen.
Well,
Your number one job as a creator is to be open to everything around you and to fearlessly, somehow, or consciously or unconsciously, channel it into whatever you're making in that moment. But if there's some theme to our talk today, George, it's what classic movies touched on, and what good movies made in any time continue to do is deal with eternal themes. And the more like even in foreign films, the more specific something is, the more universal. The more eternal something is, the more timely.
yeah, you said it so well. I thank you for the time here, for championing what is classic film in this way, and
Anytime.
trying to communicate why. We don't want to lose it, and as much as we can, I hope, return to it. But thank you for doing your work and taking the time to explain your process and your thinking.
George, you're doing the Lord's work.
Well, so are you. But thank you. I can't wait to watch more TCM, and I can't wait to see what you're doing next. So thanks, Alex.
Very good. All right. All the best.
Likewise.